All right, y'all. So we're going to continue totalitarianism. We're not going to look at Mussolini's seizure of power. And yeah, we're going to see El Duce, the leader. So what we're going to see here, this is a Vino Rosa, I think that's how you say it. This is a key time period in which Orlando predicted. As we come out of the failures of the Paris Peace Conference, Italia Redenta denied, and really is going to lead almost to immediate Orlando's resignation, creating a power vacuum, which ultimately led to really from 1919 to 1920 this communist revolutionary policy activity. I do think if we add it into the whole red summers and the red fear, the red scare that we've talked about, and that's one of the key reasons why the big three had to compromise so quickly. Italy is definitely a part of that. This total and utter chaos. The Italian people feared that feared a communist takeover. That there's really legitimately a moment in which there's this idea that Italy is going to be wiped out of its cultural past, and this new materialistic world is going to occur. And I do think that the Pope had a right to be frustrated and fearful of that materialistic communism rising. But that's just me. So the rise of Mussolini. During World War One, you definitely should have noticed that he shifted from his socialist views to a rabid nationalist. Really kind of an important element that he actually was a socialist newspaper editor who was kicked out of the party of the socialists because of his staunch nationalistic views, which seemed to be the opposite of what the communists and socialists wanted. Um, Mussolini will organize what we call the black shirts. The black shirts are political thugs who are going to roam the streets of Italy and enforcing this new fascist idealism. They're going to use baseball bats. They're going to utilize, or when I say baseball bats, they're going to utilize other types of violence. They're going to keep records on how people vote. Uh, the black shirts are a really scary group. If you wanted to compare the black shirts to someone in America, it could be the Klan in the 1920s South. This constant fear that if the black shirts show up to your house, who's going to be killed? Who's going to be hurt? What's going to happen? Who's going to be lynched? So this realistic, real fear, and now all of a sudden, out of that fear, Mussolini is really gonna surge forward. With fascism, Mussolini begins to use mass politics, and even though fascism in itself wants to get rid of the democracy, pretty clear, I think in some ways, isn't this connecting us back to Napoleon III? How Napoleon III used democracy to destroy democracy. Well, this is going to be the exact same way. Here, Mussolini is going to utilize mass politics with the promise of bringing back Roman greatness, bringing back the failures of World War One, the bringing back of the great military might of Italians, and people out of fear, maybe with the black shirts, they're going to begin to fall in line. And this really the peak of this happens in 1922. And in 1922, there's a threat. This is October. There's a threat of a fascist invasion of Rome and the overthrowing of the democracy led by Mussolini. It appears that all the historiography really points out that Victor Emmanuel III, that's the king of Italy, if he and Prime Minister Giletti engaged Mussolini here, utilized the military might of Italy, clearly it seems that Mussolini would have lost. Instead, Giletti, who's the prime minister, decides to use some real politic that's really going to bite him in the back. He convinces Victor Emmanuel III to let's before the invasion, before this coup d'etat's attempt, instead of Mussolini trying to make a martyr out of himself or his movement, why don't we make him we'll make him prime minister. I'll be the vice the vice prime minister, and then I will control him. And Giletti was like, I'll control him, and when things go bad, Mussolini will be the face. He'll be kicked out, and we'll be able to move on with our lives. Unfortunately, clearly that's not what happens. So on the eve of the invasion, Victor Emmanuel III gave an overture and allowed Mussolini to become prime minister. Mussolini accepted, but the next day he still leads his so-called March on Rome. Despite him having power now, despite no need of a coup d'etat, he understood he needed the images of this invasion. And these images, this is one image that you see right here that will be used 10 years later in the Italian textbooks. The March on Rome will become a true coup d'etat. They will develop this myth of Mussolini and how Mussolini sees power as the conquering hero. All of it is a lie. All of it was created to generate mass propaganda. Uh, was Mussolini a genius? I doubt it. But was there somebody there thinking about this? Probably. But again, that Martian room, a complete and utter myth. It was not a seizure of power. He's already been granted, but now he has the imagery that he wants for the future. And as prime minister, he immediately begins to consolidate power. He argues that it's time to return to order. Really, again, this reminds me of Law and Order of Nixon. The return to order is convincing people that we need to bring back conservative good values to reorganize society so that the margins, those communist socialists, we can expel them. Um, the political violence really is an uptick here. We see the assassination of that socialist. And again, I like how McKay says that we're not sure how he died, if it was a fascist or not. But regardless of that, this political assassination, Mussolini is not going to utilize it for his own good and say, "Oh my gosh, we're in a state of emergency." So they begin to usher in all this propaganda, the idea that it's time for us to get ourselves right with Italy and right with our religion, and we need to move forward. People began to say, "Make Italy fascist" became the slogan. People were convinced that that would bring a return to order, a return to stability out of this chaos. And this is where the Dr. McKay does not identify. He discusses it. It's called the Ackerbo Law, and this is a really important element. And I'm going to disagree a little bit with McKay here. McKay talks about the idea that conservatives were okay with this because they were convinced that Mussolini was not a whack out extremist. I disagree with that. The Ackerbo Law, the only reason Italian Parliament supported this law is because the black shirts visited the politicians. And these visits were not a little parlay where they're hanging out. They are utilizing violence to threaten the lives of the members of the parliament as well as their families. If you don't pass the Ackerbo law, you will die. And so even the socialists here are going to pass this law that ultimately granted whatever party had 25% of the popular vote immediately got 66% of the parliamentary seats. The reason they need 66 or 67% of the seats is so that they can just get rid of the Constitution, create vast constitutional changes. And it appears to me that many of the socialists who ended up passing the Ackerman Law, they fled Italy knowing what was coming. And in 1922-23, we see that the fascists have gained power. By 1924, Il Duce or Mussolini declares himself Il Duce, the leader of Italy. He alone represents the future of Italy. I love the slogan, everything in the state, nothing outside the state, nothing against the state. It is about the idea of the super centralization in which he's seized all power. By 1926, Italy is a single party dictatorship with unquestioned leadership. Totalitarianism, economically, politically, socially, all those elements are going to be underneath Mussolini's authority. Before we move on, I do want to point out this is both good and bad for Mussolini. Mussolini has no rivals. The problem is anything in the future that goes bad, it's going to wear on him. So when we get to World War II, we're going to find out what happens to him, and it's not surprising. One of the things Mussolini is attempting to do is centralize. And one of the ways he can centralize his authority is by utilizing religion. And what we see here is that Lateran Accords, Mussolini really sought to end this political schism with the Catholic Church. Before 1929, the Catholic Church still did not recognize an independent Italy. The Pope is still angry with the unifications of a secular Italy, especially when Rome became the capital. There's a lot of animosity. There's not this, even Pope Leo, who had been the compromising Pope, the modern Pope, he is not going to put aside his animosity towards this. But in 1929, Mussolini really ushers in this new era. The Lateran Accords of 1929, Mussolini accepts Italy as a Catholic state, and that they're going to really move against this religious toleration of the modern age. Mussolini secured or embraced Catholicism to secure and stabilize his hold over Italy. I like this propaganda here to the right. I was doing a little bit of research on that website you see there, and it really indicated that this image is meant to be the Italian Trinity. In the middle, you have the Pope. To the right, you have Mussolini, and to the left, you have Victor Emmanuel the Third. That's kind of an interesting element. A Trinity, this Trinity of politics is it usurping the Holy Trinity? I don't know if that's the way they're going, but that's just a fascinating element. But by 1929, the Lateran Accords had settled the criticism, the schism, and this is the final finding. Yes, Italy's going to be a Catholic country, and the Pope will have complete leadership over the Vatican. The Lateran Accords created the Vatican City. Today, the Vatican City is the smallest country in the entire world. If you want to know more about that, feel free to check that out. And this is really going to lead us right to the 1930s. In the 1930s, I wanted to point out a lot of his early policies generated a lot of fanaticism, generated a lot of leadership in some ways, but it really didn't achieve significant goals. He did not have a little bit later when we get to Hitler had the Weimar Republic, had some economic expansion going on, and he's going to manipulate that, take ownership of that. Nothing like that's really happened in Italy in the early 1920s. So Mussolini basically has a tabula rasa, and he's not able to generate the economic energy of some of the other countries we'll see. So when the Italian people begin to see the great German Third Reich rise up or whatever, and they see Stalin and the 5-year plans, he begins to say, no, we're great, and he begins a policy of aggrandizement. In 1935 and 36, we called the Abyssinia crisis, and this is where Ethiopia or Abyssinia, it is an independent country. It was one, if you go back to our previous lectures, it was one of the very few African areas that were able to remain independent of imperial rule. The Ethiopians actually had defeated Italy in the 1890s. So this is a humiliation that still hangs over the Italians. And in the meanwhile, Abyssinia becomes a founding country, a founding member of the League of Nations, and is really caught up in this disarmament and the belief in collective security. So they feel secure. But in 1935, Mussolini manufactured a crisis in which he is going to use his industrial war machine to invade. I like this map here. You can really see the invasion routes. And really, Abyssinia or Ethiopia really could not resist. The leader of Ethiopia turned to the League of Nations and asked what was going on. The French and the British didn't know what to do. They feared leading a war. Prior to this, Italy seemed to be part of their alliance system against Germany. But now all of it is out the window, creating this utter chaos. And I really like this political cartoon. You can pause here if you wanted to. But what we see here is Mussolini he's aggrandizing. Here we see Lady Liberty, the League of Nations, and she's saying, hey, what about the rights of this country? The rights and wrongs of Abyssinia. But aren't you in the League? Mussolini's part of the League of Nations, and yet he's invading the League of Nations. And he's very, very excited about this, and he says, "Hey, the league has nothing to do." And then here you see in the left, this is going to be France and England trying to come up with some compromise that ultimately empowered Italy and saw Abyssinia disappear. Really, nothing they can do about it, and it really illustrates the weakness of the League of Nations, and really is painting that pathway towards World War II. And in 1939, I know we're a little bit away from that. Here we see a political cartoon of the boot Italy eating this innocent Albania. But in 1939, by this time, Hitler's really aggrandized, and Mussolini's people were like, wait, are we great yet? So he's like, hey, this is what we're doing. We're going to invade Albania. Albania in the 1990s, the number one mode of transportation was horse-drawn wagons. So that's the 1990s. So just imagine what Albania was in the 1930s. Albania is one of the poorest, if not the poorest, countries in Europe today, and was the most underdeveloped country at that time. So this invasion of Albania really was more about use of imagery. Albania was once a historic part of the Roman Empire, and that's where Dr. McKay says, hey, at the outcome of all this, fascism is just Romanist. The idea of this cult of ancient Rome coming together and Mussolini promising to be that Roman expert. And this is to finish this off. I just want to point out this cult of Il Duce. Here we see a first grade book, really telling the first graders, you must love Mussolini as your parents love him. Really trying to create this. So as early as first grade, we're seeing this propaganda. We see these military parades of Viva Il Duce. Here is a government building that has the face of Mussolini. For me, it's so creepy, and yet that was part of this new architecture of power of Italy. He's going to be emboldened. Here's the conquering Mussolini. They're trying to tell the story of the coup d'etat that never was. But again, imagery. And here's three different elements of this cult of Il Duce. He alone represented the greatness of Italy. I hope that all makes sense to you guys. I'm going to pause here. We're gonna hit Hitler next.